The manila envelope slid across my kitchen table as I opened it, and I knew, before reading a single word, that my peaceful Tuesday morning was about to get a whole lot more complicated. My name is Oliver Zimmerman, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona for the past 15 years. I bought my house back in 2010, right after the housing market crash, and I got it for a steal. The property sat on a generous half-acre lot at the edge of the development, with a detached workshop that had sealed the deal for me. I am a custom furniture maker, and that workshop represented my dream workspace. Over the years, I had transformed it from a basic structure into a professional woodworking shop, complete with industrial-grade equipment, climate control, and enough storage for exotic hardwoods that would make any craftsman weep with joy. The letter inside the envelope came from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, specifically from their president, a woman named Patricia Henderson. I had heard her name thrown around at neighborhood gatherings, always with a mixture of dread and resignation. She had taken over the HOA presidency about 8 months ago, and apparently, she had made it her personal mission to enforce every microscopic rule in our community guidelines. The letter stated that my workshop violated HOA regulations regarding commercial activity on residential property. According to Patricia, multiple neighbors had complained about the noise, traffic, and unsightly nature of my business operation. The letter demanded I cease all commercial woodworking activities immediately and threatened legal action if I did not comply within 30 days. The fine structure outlined started at $500 per day of continued violation. I sat there staring at the words, feeling my blood pressure rise. Commercial activity. I ran a small custom furniture business, sure, but I had maybe 3 clients at any given time. Most of my work came through word of mouth and online orders. I did not have customers streaming through my driveway daily. Maybe 1 or 2 people per week stopped by to discuss projects or pick up finished pieces. As for noise, I kept strict working hours between 9 in the morning and 5 in the evening on weekdays, never working weekends in the shop. The unsightly nature comment particularly stung. My workshop looked better than half the garages on our street. I had painted it to match my house, maintained the landscaping around it, and kept the overhead door closed when working. You could barely tell it was there from the street. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer, David Chen. We had gone to high school together, and he had helped me with various business contracts over the years. "David, I need you to look at something for me," I said when he answered. "Oliver, good to hear from you. What is going on?" I explained the situation, reading him the letter verbatim. There was a long pause on the other end. "You have your original purchase documents, the deed, title report, all that?" David asked. "Of course. Everything is in my file cabinet. Pull them out and send me copies. Also, send me a copy of the current HOA bylaws and CC and Articus if you have them." This sounds like overreach, but I need to see what we are dealing with. I spent the next hour digging through my filing cabinet. The original purchase documents were all there, preserved in protective sleeves because I am meticulous about important paperwork. I scanned everything and emailed it to David, then drove down to the HOA office to request a copy of the current governing documents. The HOA office was located in our community meeting hall, a building near the subdivision entrance. I had only been inside a handful of times over the years, mostly for the annual meetings that I attended out of a sense of obligation rather than interest. The meeting hall itself was a nice building, probably built in the early 90s, with a large assembly room, a small kitchen, and a couple of offices. The office manager, a pleasant woman in her 60s named Susan, greeted me when I walked in. Oliver, right? I have seen you at a few meetings. What can I do for you? I need a copy of the current HOA bylaws and CC and Articus, please. Susan's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. May I ask why? I pulled out the letter from Patricia and showed it to her. Susan read it, and her lips pressed into a thin line. I will get you those documents, she said quietly. Give me just a moment. While she disappeared into the back office, I looked around the meeting hall through the open doorway. It was empty at the moment, chairs stacked along one wall, tables folded up. The building had good bones, and I found myself noting the crown molding and wainscoting with a professional eye. Solid craftsmanship, probably custom work from when it was built. Susan returned with a thick binder. Here you go. You can make copies of whatever you need. There is a copier right here. Actually, can I just take photos with my phone? It will be faster, of course. I spent 20 minutes photographing every page of the relevant documents, then thanked Susan and headed home. She had seemed sympathetic, which made me wonder if Patricia had been making waves with other residents too back home. I sent all the photos to David and settled in to read through the HOA documents myself. I am not a lawyer, but I can parse legalese well enough after years of dealing with business contracts. The more I read, the angrier I became. The section Patricia cited in her letter regarding commercial activity was incredibly vague. It prohibited residents from operating businesses that created excessive noise, traffic, or nuisance to neighbors. The key word was excessive, which was entirely subjective. There were no specific definitions, no decibel measurements for noise, no traffic count thresholds. Just excessive. Furthermore, my original purchase documents included a specific addendum regarding the workshop. The previous owner had run an auto repair hobby shop in that building, and the addendum explicitly acknowledged the workshop's existence and permitted its continued use for personal projects and small-scale business activity. That addendum had been filed with the county recorder's office along with my deed. It was legally binding. My phone rang. David. Oliver, I have been going through everything you sent me. This is interesting. Interesting how? Your addendum trumps their current bylaws. It was executed before the HOA even existed in its current form. The subdivision went through a major restructuring in 1998, and your house predates that. The addendum is grandfathered in. So they cannot touch me, not based on what I am seeing, but there is something else. I pulled the property records for your subdivision just to get a complete picture. Oliver, did you know your property line extends beyond what you probably think it does? What do you mean? Your lot is irregular shaped, right? The workshop is on the back corner. Yeah, the property angles back. It is why I got more land than the standard lots. Right. Well, according to the survey and legal description in your deed, your property line runs along the eastern edge of the subdivision. And unless I am reading this wrong, it includes a small parcel that sits right where the HOA meeting hall is located. I nearly dropped my phone. What? I need to verify this with a surveyor, but the legal description in your deed includes a meets and bounds call that appears to encompass the land under the meeting hall. It is possible there was an error when the subdivision was platted, or when the properties were divided up. These things happen more often than you would think. How is that even possible? The HOA has been using that building for decades. Possession does not equal ownership. If the deed is clear and the property was never properly transferred, you might own it. Let me hire a surveyor and get this confirmed. In the meantime, do not respond to Patricia's letter. Let her think you are scrambling. I hung up, my mind reeling. I owned the HOA meeting hall. That seemed absurd, but David was thorough. If he thought it was possible, it was worth investigating. The next week passed slowly. I continued my work in the workshop, fulfilling orders for a dining table and a custom bookshelf. Every day, I half expected another letter from Patricia, but nothing came. The silence felt ominous. David called me on Thursday afternoon. "Survey is done. Oliver, you definitely own that land. The parcel under the meeting hall is legally yours. It looks like when the subdivision was developed, there was a paperwork error. The developer sold your lot with the original boundary description, which included that parcel, but then also deeded the parcel separately to the HOA's predecessor organization. The problem is, your deed was recorded first and has priority. So what happens now? Well, technically, the HOA has been occupying your property without permission for years. You could demand they vacate, or you could negotiate a lease, or you could sell it to them. But here is the thing, Oliver. This gives you serious leverage. If Patricia wants to play hardball about your workshop, you have a nuclear option. I do not want to be vindictive. I just want to be left alone to do my work. I understand. Let me reach out to their lawyer and see if we can resolve this quietly. I will mention the property issue and suggest we discuss both matters together. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. It was Patricia Henderson herself, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Your lawyer has made some outlandish claims about property ownership that I assure you are completely baseless. I am calling to demand that you cease these intimidation tactics immediately and comply with our original request. If you continue on this path, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you. Contact me as soon as possible." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to David. He called me back within minutes, laughing. "She is rattled. Their lawyer knows I am right about the property. He practically admitted it when we spoke. Patricia is just too stubborn to back down. So what is our next move?" "I am going to send a formal letter asserting your property rights and offering to negotiate. I will also demand they withdraw their complaint about your workshop based on your grandfathered addendum. If they refuse, we might end up in court, but honestly, they do not have a leg to stand on. Do what you need to do." David sent the letter, and for a while, things went quiet again. I kept working, kept living my life. I ran into a few neighbors who mentioned they had heard rumors about a dispute between me and the HOA, but nobody seemed to have details. I kept my mouth shut and just said it was being handled. 3 weeks after David sent his letter, I received notice that the HOA had filed a lawsuit against me. They were suing to enforce their commercial activity restrictions and seeking an injunction to shut down my workshop, plus $15,000 in fines they claimed I owed for the period I had been in violation. David was not surprised. "Patricia is doubling down. Okay, we will countersue. We will assert your property rights to the meeting hall parcel and sue for fair market rent for the years they have been using it without your permission. We will also seek attorney's fees." "How much are we talking for the rent? A building that size on that much land in this market?" "Conservatively, $2,000 a month. They have been there for, 25 years. That is $600,000 give or take plus interest." I whistled. "That is going to make me real popular in the neighborhood. You did not start this fight, Oliver. Patricia did. You are just defending yourself." The case moved forward. We went through discovery, where both sides exchanged documents and evidence. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that my deed was ambiguous, but the survey was crystal clear. The meeting hall sat squarely on my property. They also tried to claim adverse possession, arguing that they had used the property openly and continuously for long enough to claim ownership. David shot that down quickly. Arizona requires 10 years of hostile possession for adverse possession claims, but the possession cannot be with the owner's permission or knowledge. Since I had only owned the property for 15 years and had no reason to know about the parcel issue until recently, and since the HOA had never attempted to claim ownership openly, adverse possession did not apply. As for the workshop issue, our position was simple. My addendum predated their bylaws and explicitly allowed commercial use. Their current rules could not override a recorded deed restriction. The HOA hired an expert witness to testify about noise levels and traffic. David hired our own experts who measured the actual noise from my workshop at the property line and found it well within acceptable limits for a residential area. Our traffic expert analyzed my business records and determined I averaged 4 client visits per week, hardly excessive. During this process, I started learning more about Patricia Henderson. She had moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago and immediately joined the HOA board. Within 6 months, she had orchestrated a political coup that resulted in the previous president resigning and her taking over. Since then, she had been on a crusade to enforce every possible rule, no matter how petty. I spoke with Susan, the office manager, off the record over coffee one afternoon. She was frustrated and burnt out. "Patricia is impossible," Susan confided. "She sends me lists of supposed violations every single day. Trash cans left out too long, grass half an inch too high, paint colors she thinks are not approved even though they are. She has filed complaints against probably 40 different homeowners in the past 8 months. You are just the only one with the resources to fight back. Why do not people vote her out?" She stacked the board with her friends. And honestly, most people do not pay attention to HOA politics. They do not come to meetings. As long as their own homes are not being targeted, they do not care. That is depressing. Tell me about it. I am probably going to quit once this lawsuit is resolved. I cannot deal with her anymore. The trial date was set for early November, about 7 months after I had received that first letter. As the date approached, David and I prepared extensively. We had our evidence organized, our witnesses lined up, our arguments rehearsed. The night before trial, David called me with news. Patricia's lawyer reached out. They want to settle. What are the terms? They will withdraw their lawsuit and all fines if you agree not to pursue rent for the meeting hall property. That is it. I still own the property. Yes, they would want a long-term lease at a nominal rate, maybe $1 a year, just to formalize things. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Patricia's face when the judge ruled against her, but another part of me just wanted this over. What do you recommend? Honestly, go to trial. You are going to win, and when you do, you will have a judgment that protects your workshop rights permanently. Plus, you will have leverage to negotiate a real lease for the meeting hall property. You could make decent income from it, or you could sell the parcel to the HOA for fair market value. Either way, you come out ahead. Let us do it. The next morning, I put on my best suit and met David at the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix. The courthouse was an imposing modern building, all glass and concrete. We went through security and found our assigned courtroom on the 4th floor. Patricia was already there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Richard Morrison. Patricia wore a severe black suit and had her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. When she saw me, her expression could have curdled milk. The judge assigned to our case was the Honorable Margaret Sullivan, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had a reputation as no-nonsense and fair, which suited me fine. The trial started with opening statements. Morrison went first, painting me as a scofflaw, who was running an illegal commercial operation in a residential neighborhood, disturbing the peace and lowering property values. He made it sound like I was operating a lumber mill at all hours of the night. David's opening was more measured. He outlined the facts clearly. My grandfather rights to operate my workshop, the lack of any actual disturbance or violation, and the HOA's overreach. He also mentioned, almost casually, that we would be presenting evidence regarding property ownership issues that called into question the HOA's standing to bring this suit in the first place. Morrison objected, claiming property ownership was not relevant to the commercial activity question. Judge Sullivan overruled him. If there are questions about property rights, I want to hear them. Proceed. The HOA presented their case first since they were the original plaintiffs. They called several neighbors who testified about noise from my workshop. Under cross-examination, David got each of them to admit they had never actually measured the noise, never complained to me directly, and in most cases, could not even remember specific incidents. One woman admitted she had only complained because Patricia had personally asked her to. They called their noise expert, who presented measurements taken from the property line. David shredded his methodology on cross, pointing out that the measurements were taken during the middle of the day when ambient noise was already high, and that the expert had failed to account for other noise sources in the area. The traffic expert was even worse for them. Our business records showed minimal client visits, and the expert had to admit that my traffic impact was negligible compared to typical residential activity. Morrison tried to argue that the principle mattered more than the specific impact, that allowing commercial activity would set a precedent that could harm the neighborhood. Judge Sullivan did not look impressed. Then it was our turn. David called me to the stand first. I testified about my business, my working hours, my efforts to be a good neighbor. I explained the history of the workshop and the addendum in my deed. Morrison's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to trip me up, to get me to admit that I was running a full-scale commercial operation. I stayed calm and stuck to the facts. Yes, I made money from my woodworking. No, I did not have employees. No, I did not have regular business hours where customers could walk in. Yes, I took custom orders. No, I did not mass-produce anything. Mr. Zimmerman, how much money did you make from your woodworking business last year? Approximately $45,000. And you do not consider that commercial activity. I consider it a small home-based business, which is explicitly allowed under my deed addendum. Morrison looked frustrated. He tried a few more questions, but I did not give him anything useful. Next, David called our real estate expert, a man named Thomas Gray who specialized in property law and surveys. Thomas walked through the survey results, explaining clearly and methodically how my property boundaries included the parcel under the meeting hall. In your professional opinion, Mr. Gray, who owns the land currently occupied by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA meeting hall. Based on the recorded deed, the legal description, and the survey I conducted, Oliver Zimmerman owns that parcel. Morrison jumped up. Objection. This is completely outside the scope of this case. We are here about commercial activity violations, not property disputes. Judge Sullivan looked at David. Counselor, why is this relevant, Your Honor? It goes to the HOA's standing and credibility. They are claiming to enforce community rules on behalf of the homeowners, but they are doing so while occupying property they do not own. Furthermore, if Mr. Zimmerman owns the meeting hall property, he has a colorable claim that the HOA lacks the authority to enforce rules against him at all, since their existence depends on having a legitimate meeting place for conducting official business. The judge considered this. I will allow it, but keep it focused. David continued with Thomas, establishing beyond doubt that I owned the property. Morrison's cross-examination tried to poke holes in the survey, but Thomas was unshakable. Then David called Susan, the office manager. She testified reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable, but she was honest. Yes, the HOA had never paid rent for the meeting hall. No, she was not aware of any lease agreement. Yes, they had always assumed the HOA owned the property. Has there been an increase in violation complaints since Patricia Henderson became president? David asked. Objection. Relevance, Morrison shouted. I will allow it, Judge Sullivan said. I want to understand the context here. Susan nodded. Yes, there has been a significant increase. We went from maybe 10 complaints a year to 10 or more per week. And how many of those complaints have resulted in actual violations being confirmed? Maybe 10%. Most of them are either borderline issues or not violations at all once we investigate. David let that sink in, then turned to the judge. No further questions. Morrison tried to rehabilitate Susan on cross, but she stuck to her answers. You could see Patricia fuming at the defense table. We took a lunch break. David was confident. That went well. Sullivan is smart. She sees what is happening here. After lunch, David presented our deed addendum as evidence, along with expert testimony from a real estate attorney who confirmed that the addendum was legally binding and could not be superseded by later HOA bylaws. Morrison argued that times had changed and that community standards should be allowed to evolve, but his expert could not dispute the black-letter law. Finally, David rested our case. Both sides gave closing arguments. Morrison tried to make it about community standards and property values. David focused on the law and the facts. Judge Sullivan took a brief recess to review her notes, then returned to the bench. I am ready to rule, she said. This is actually a fairly straightforward case, despite attempts to complicate it. The question before me is whether the HOA has the authority to prohibit Mr. Zimmerman's workshop activities and impose fines. Having reviewed all the evidence, I find that they do not. Patricia's face went white. Mr. Zimmerman's deed includes a recorded addendum that explicitly permits the workshop and small-scale commercial activity. This addendum was properly recorded with the county and predates the current HOA bylaws. It cannot be superseded by later restrictions. Furthermore, the evidence shows that Mr. Zimmerman's activities do not constitute a nuisance. The noise levels are within acceptable limits, the traffic impact is minimal, and the workshop is well maintained. Judge Sullivan looked directly at Patricia. I am troubled by what appears to be selective and possibly vindictive enforcement. The evidence suggests that this complaint was not driven by legitimate community concerns, but by personal animosity. She turned back to her notes. As to the property ownership issue, while that is not technically before me in this case, I find the evidence presented by Mr. Zimmerman to be compelling. I would strongly encourage the parties to resolve that matter outside of court, but if Mr. Zimmerman chooses to pursue his property rights, he would appear to have a strong case. She banged her gavel. The HOA's complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Zimmerman is awarded attorney's fees and costs. I am also ordering the HOA to issue a written statement to all homeowners clarifying that Mr. Zimmerman's workshop is fully compliant with all applicable regulations, and that no violations exist. This statement must be issued within 30 days. Morrison stood. Your Honor, we would like to request a stay pending appeal. Denied. This court is adjourned. David shook my hand, grinning. That was about as complete a victory as you can get. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not realized I was carrying. Thank you, David. I could not have done this without you. Patricia stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me, Morrison hurrying after her. I caught Susan's eye in the gallery, and she gave me a small smile and a thumbs up. Over the next few weeks, things started to change in Meadowbrook Estates. The HOA issued the required statement about my workshop, though I could practically feel Patricia's rage radiating through the words. Several neighbors reached out to apologize, saying they had been pressured by Patricia to complain and had not realized how far she would take things. David and I began negotiating with the HOA about the meeting hall property. I had no desire to kick them out or cause problems for my neighbors, but I also was not about to give away a valuable asset. We eventually reached an agreement. The HOA would purchase the parcel for $150,000, which was a fair price that accounted for my willingness to sell to them rather than a third party. The money would fund my retirement account nicely, but the story does not end there. About 2 months after the trial, Susan called me. She sounded excited. "Oliver, you need to come to the next HOA meeting. There is going to be a vote." "What kind of vote?" "Just trust me. Be there." The meeting was on a Tuesday evening. I walked into the meeting hall, soon to no longer be on my property, and found it packed. I had never seen so many homeowners at an HOA meeting. Susan spotted me and waved me to a seat she had saved in the front. The meeting was called to order by Patricia, who looked even more pinched and sour than usual. She tried to rush through the agenda, but then a homeowner named George raised his hand. "I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in the current HOA board." "That is not on the agenda," Patricia snapped. "I do not care," George said. "I am a homeowner and I have the right to make motions. I have signatures from 20% of the homeowners requesting this vote, which per our bylaws means you have to allow it." He held up a petition. Patricia's face turned red, but she could not deny it. The vote was held. Patricia and her entire board were removed by a margin of 83 to 12. A new board was elected on the spot, with George as president and Susan agreeing to stay on as office manager under the new leadership. One of the new board's first acts was to review all pending violation complaints and dismiss the vast majority of them as petty or unfounded. Patricia tried to contest the vote, claiming irregularities, but the HOA's lawyer, who had apparently grown tired of her antics, confirmed that everything was done properly. She moved out of Meadowbrook Estates 6 months later. The new HOA board turned out to be reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than nitpicking enforcement. They repainted the meeting hall, updated the community pool, and organized neighborhood events that people actually enjoyed. Property values went up, as the neighborhood became known as a desirable place to live rather than an HOA horror story. As for me, I continued my woodworking business in peace. Word got around about the case, and I actually got more clients because of it, people who appreciated craftsmanship, and the fact that I had stood up to HOA overreach. My business grew steadily, and I hired an apprentice, a young woman named Rachel who showed real talent for furniture making. I used part of the money from selling the meeting hall property to upgrade my equipment and expand the workshop. I also donated $10,000 to a legal fund that helped homeowners fight unfair HOA actions, which felt like a good way to pay forward the victory I had achieved. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after the trial, I was in the workshop teaching Rachel how to cut dovetail joints when David stopped by. He had become a good friend through this whole ordeal, beyond just being my lawyer. "How are things?" he asked, watching Rachel work. "Good. Really good, actually. You know, when I first got that letter from Patricia, I was so angry, but looking back, I think it might have been the best thing that could have happened." "How do you figure?" It forced me to really understand my property rights, to stand up for myself. It brought the neighborhood together to get rid of a toxic board. It helped me grow my business. And it taught me that sometimes you have to fight, even when it would be easier to just give in. David smiled. That is a pretty healthy perspective. Most people would still be bitter. Oh, I was bitter for a while, but bitterness is exhausting. I would rather just build furniture and enjoy my life. Rachel successfully completed her dovetail joint and held it up proudly. I inspected it and nodded my approval. Nice work. Keep practicing and you will be cutting those in your sleep. She grinned and went back to work. David and I walked outside, standing in the afternoon sun. You ever hear what happened to Patricia? David asked. No, I have not really thought about her. Apparently she tried to join another HOA board in Scottsdale, but word had gotten around. They rejected her application. Last I heard, she was considering moving to Nevada. Good riddance. We stood there for a while, just enjoying the quiet. A neighbor walking his dog waved at me and I waved back. A couple of kids rode by on bikes, laughing about something. Normal neighborhood sounds. You know what the ironic thing is? I said. Patricia spent all that time trying to protect property values and neighborhood standards, but she was actually making things worse. She created an atmosphere of fear and resentment. The neighborhood is so much better now that people can just live their lives without worrying about getting fined for leaving their trash can out an extra hour. Control freaks rarely see the damage they cause, David said. They are too focused on being right. Yeah. Well, she learned the hard way that being right does not matter if you are standing on the wrong side of the law. David left a while later, and I went back into the workshop. Rachel had moved on to practicing mortise and tenon joints, her face scrunched in concentration. I smiled, remembering when I was that focused on learning every technique, every skill. The workshop smelled like fresh cut wood and mineral oil. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. My tools were organized on the walls, each in its place. This was my domain, my creative space, and I had fought to protect it. The phone rang. A potential client wanting to discuss a custom dining table. I took the call, sketched out ideas, and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Just another day in my small business, the one I had every right to operate from my property. That evening, I locked up the workshop and walked back to my house. The sun was setting, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on my back patio, looking out at my property. The whole experience had taught me something important about standing your ground, not in an aggressive or confrontational way, but in a firm, principled way. I had not gone looking for a fight with Patricia or the HOA. I had simply refused to be pushed around when I knew I was in the right. The legal system, for all its flaws, had worked the way it was supposed to. Judge Sullivan had looked at the facts, applied the law, and reached a just conclusion. David had been an excellent advocate, but ultimately, the strength of our case had come from having clear documentation and being on the right side of the law. I thought about all the homeowners who had suffered under Patricia's regime, paying fines for minor infractions, living in fear of violation notices. Some of them had probably just paid the fines rather than fight, even when they were in the right. I felt fortunate that I had the resources and stubbornness to push back. The meeting hall sale had closed the previous month. The money was safely invested, and the HOA now had clear title to the property they had been using all along. It was a fair resolution that left everyone better off than when we started, except perhaps Patricia. But she had brought that on herself. George, the new HOA president, had stopped by a few weeks earlier to thank me personally. He said my case had been a wake-up call for the neighborhood, showing people that they did not have to accept unreasonable authority just because it came from the HOA. You inspired people, he had said, not to be rebellious, but to be informed and engaged. Meeting attendance is up. People are reading the bylaws. They are asking questions. We have a real community now instead of a dictatorship. That had felt good to hear. As night fell, I went inside and made dinner. Simple stuff, just a grilled chicken breast and salad, but I enjoyed cooking for myself. The house was quiet in a peaceful way. I had built a good life here in Gilbert, and I had defended it when necessary. The woodworking business continued to thrive over the following months. I completed a beautiful cherry wood dining table for a client in Scottsdale, a set of custom cabinets for a kitchen renovation in Chandler, and an intricate jewelry box as a 50th anniversary gift. Each piece was unique, crafted with care and attention to detail. Rachel proved to be an excellent apprentice. She had a natural feel for wood and was not afraid to put in the hard work required to master the craft. I taught her everything I knew, the same way my mentor had taught me decades ago. It felt good to pass on that knowledge. The neighborhood around me continued to improve under the new HOA leadership. They repaved the roads, updated the community landscaping, and organized quarterly social events that actually brought people together. The pool got a renovation, the playground got new equipment, and the entrance to the subdivision got fresh signage. Property values did increase, which I found amusing. Patricia had claimed my workshop was hurting values, but it turned out that reasonable HOA governance and a sense of community were far more important than rigid rule enforcement. I ran into Morrison, Patricia's lawyer, at a local restaurant about 18 months after the trial. He was with his family and we made eye contact across the room. I nodded politely and he came over to my table after a moment. "Mr. Zimmerman, I wanted to say something to you," he said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Okay. That case, your case with the HOA. I want you to know that I advised Patricia to settle multiple times. She refused to listen. I am glad Judge Sullivan ruled the way she did. It was the right call. I appreciated his honesty. I understand you were just doing your job. Yes, but there are limits. I do not represent the Meadowbrook HOA anymore. After that case, I made a decision to be more selective about my clients. Life is too short to defend people who are clearly in the wrong." We shook hands, and he went back to his family. It was a small moment, but it illustrated how the case had ripple effects beyond just me and my workshop. Susan, the office manager, became a good friend. She had stayed on with the new HOA board and seemed much happier. We sometimes met for coffee, and she would update me on the neighborhood politics, which were dramatically less toxic than before. "You know what is funny?" she said one morning. "We get maybe 1 or 2 complaint calls a week now, down from dozens under Patricia. And the complaints we do get are usually legitimate things, like actual code violations or maintenance issues. People are not reporting each other for petty nonsense anymore." "Because they are not being encouraged to," I said. "Exactly. Patricia created this culture of surveillance and reporting. She made people paranoid. George and the new board focus on real problems and treat homeowners like adults. It is amazing how much that changes the atmosphere." The legal victory and the subsequent changes in the HOA had an unexpected benefit for my business. I was featured in a local magazine article about small businesses and property rights, which brought in even more clients. People liked the story, the idea of a craftsman defending his right to work. It resonated with a lot of folks who were tired of excessive regulation and bureaucratic overreach. I hired a second apprentice, a guy named Marcus who had recently graduated from a vocational program. Between Rachel, Marcus, and myself, we could take on larger projects without sacrificing quality. The workshop was humming with activity, but still within the bounds of what was reasonable for a residential area. The irony was not lost on me that my business had grown significantly because of Patricia's lawsuit. If she had just left me alone, I would have continued with my small operation, maybe 3 or 4 clients at a time. But the publicity from the case, combined with the principle of the fight, had attracted more attention and more business than I could have generated on my own. 2 years after the trial, I attended the annual HOA meeting. It was a different experience entirely from the meetings under Patricia's regime. People were friendly and engaged. George presented a straightforward financial report showing that the HOA was in good shape. They discussed upcoming projects, including a plan to add walking trails around the subdivision perimeter. During the open comment period, a newer resident raised her hand. "I just want to say, I moved here 6 months ago, and this is the friendliest neighborhood I have ever lived in. Everyone has been so welcoming. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." There was applause. George smiled. "We try to remember that an HOA should serve the community, not rule it. We are all neighbors first." After the meeting, several people came up to me to chat. Some were past clients, others were just friendly neighbors. One older gentleman, a man named Frank who lived 3 houses down from me, pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you," he said. "Patricia fined me $1,200 for having a vegetable garden in my front yard. Said it was not aesthetically appropriate. I paid it because I did not know I could fight. When I saw you beat her in court, I filed an appeal with the new board. They refunded my money and changed the rules to allow gardens. I have tomatoes and peppers growing now, and I love it." "I am glad it worked out," I said. "You did more than win your case," Frank continued. "You showed the whole neighborhood that we do not have to live in fear of our own HOA. That is worth more than money." I appreciated his words, but I had not set out to be some kind of neighborhood hero. I had just wanted to protect my business and my property rights. The fact that it had helped others was a happy side effect. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in 2 years. The lawsuit had been stressful and expensive, even with the attorney's fees award. But it had been necessary. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight, not because you want to, but because the alternative is worse. The workshop continued to be my sanctuary. Wood does not care about HOA politics or legal disputes. It responds to skill and patience and care. There is something meditative about shaping a piece of walnut or maple into something beautiful and functional. It kept me grounded through the whole ordeal. Rachel eventually became skilled enough to take on her own projects with minimal supervision. Marcus was progressing well too, though he had a tendency to rush that I had to keep correcting. Teaching them reminded me of my own journey as a craftsman, the years of practice and failure and incremental improvement. I sometimes wondered what had become of Patricia. I heard through the grapevine that she had indeed moved to Nevada, somewhere near Las Vegas. I hoped she had found peace, though I doubted it. People like her are driven by a need for control that rarely leads to happiness. The meeting hall that I had briefly owned was now fully renovated and served as a true community center. The new board had added a small library, a coffee bar, and made it available for neighborhood events beyond just HOA meetings. Kids had birthday parties there, book clubs met there, and during the holidays it became a hub for seasonal celebrations. David and I remained friends, getting together every few months for dinner or drinks. He had taken on several more HOA cases after mine, representing homeowners against overreaching boards. He said my case had given him a niche practice area that he found more rewarding than standard contract work. "You know what I have learned," he said one evening over beers. "Most HOA disputes come down to personality conflicts and power trips. The actual rules are usually less important than how they are enforced. A reasonable board can make almost any set of bylaws work. An unreasonable board can turn the most innocuous rules into weapons." Patricia definitely weaponized everything she could, I agreed, and paid the price for it. I heard she tried to sue the homeowners who voted her out, claiming the election was invalid. The suit got thrown out immediately, and the judge sanctioned her for filing a frivolous claim. I shook my head. Some people never learn. As year 3 approached since that first letter, I realized I had completely moved past any anger or resentment about the whole situation. It had become just another chapter in my life, a challenge I had faced and overcome. The workshop was busier than ever. My apprentices were developing into fine craftsmen, and I was making a comfortable living doing work I loved. The neighborhood had become genuinely pleasant. People looked out for each other without being nosy or controlling. The HOA handled necessary business efficiently and without drama. It was what a community should be. I took on a particularly interesting project that fall, building a custom home office for a tech executive in Paradise Valley. The design was complex, incorporating hidden storage, motorized sit-stand desk mechanisms, and exotic wood veneers. It pushed my skills and required all 3 of us working together to complete it. When we installed it, the client was thrilled. He asked about my business, and I told him the story, including the HOA lawsuit. He laughed and said he had his own HOA horror stories, though none that had gone to court. "The problem with HOAs is that they attract exactly the wrong kind of people," he said. "Reasonable people do not want to spend their free time policing their neighbors, so you get busybodies and control freaks running things, and everyone else suffers." "We got lucky," I said. "After the bad board got voted out, some genuinely good people stepped up. It can work if the right people are involved." The business continued to grow. I was approached by a high-end furniture store in Scottsdale about carrying some of my pieces on consignment. It was tempting, but I decided against it. I liked the custom work, the one-on-one relationships with clients. Mass production, even at a small scale, did not appeal to me. Rachel, however, was interested. She had developed her own style, more contemporary than my traditional approach, and her work was excellent. I encouraged her to pursue the store relationship, and she did. Within 6 months, she had enough business to go out on her own, though we remained close and collaborated on larger projects. Marcus became my full-time assistant, and we developed a good working rhythm. He handled much of the prep work and finishing while I focused on design and the more intricate joinery. It was a good partnership. One afternoon, I was sanding a tabletop when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered it anyway. "Is this Oliver Zimmerman?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I am a producer for a home improvement show on cable. We are doing a segment on small workshops and custom craftsmen, and your name came up. Would you be interested in being featured?" I hesitated. Publicity was good for business, but I was not sure I wanted cameras in my workshop. "Can I ask how you heard about me?" "Actually, through the article about your HOA case. Our researcher found it interesting, looked at your work, and thought you would be perfect for what we are doing." We talked for a while, and I eventually agreed to a preliminary meeting. The show was legitimate, a well-known series on DIY Network. They came out the following week, toured the workshop, and filmed some test footage of me working. The segment aired 3 months later. It was a 10-minute feature showing my workshop, my process, and a time lapse of building a custom bookshelf. They mentioned the HOA case briefly, framing it as a story about defending craftsmanship and property rights. The response was overwhelming. My website crashed from traffic. I got hundreds of emails from potential clients, other woodworkers, and people sharing their own HOA stories. I had to hire someone part-time just to manage inquiries and schedule consultations. It was surreal, going from a quiet custom furniture maker to someone with a national profile, however minor. But it was also gratifying. People appreciated quality craftsmanship, and they responded to the story of standing up for principle. Marcus and I hired another assistant, and I started being more selective about projects. I focused on the most interesting and challenging work, the pieces that pushed my skills and creativity. The business was sustainable and profitable without consuming my entire life. 4 years after the lawsuit, I was invited to speak at a homeowners' rights conference in Phoenix. The organizers wanted me to tell my story and discuss strategies for dealing with overreaching HOAs. I was not a public speaker by nature, but I agreed. The conference was held at a downtown hotel, and I was surprised by the turnout. Hundreds of people, all dealing with or interested in HOA issues. I told my story, focusing on the importance of documentation, knowing your rights, and being willing to fight when necessary. During the Q&A, someone asked if I had any regrets about how things went down. No, I said honestly. I wish it had not been necessary, but I do not regret standing up for myself. The outcome was better than I could have hoped for, not just for me, but for my whole neighborhood. What advice would you give to someone facing a similar situation? Another person asked. Get a good lawyer who understands property law and HOA governance. Document everything. Know your deed restrictions and what was recorded when you bought your property, and do not let them intimidate you. HOAs have power, but they are not above the law. After my talk, several people came up to share their own stories. Some had fought and won, others had lost, and a few were still in the middle of disputes. I listened and offered what advice I could, though I made clear I was not a lawyer and could only speak from my experience. One woman, probably in her 60s, had tears in her eyes as she thanked me. My HOA has been trying to force me to remove my rose garden for 2 years, she said. They claim it is a water waste and aesthetically inappropriate, but my husband planted that garden before he died 5 years ago. It is all I have left of him. Your story gave me the courage to fight. I hired a lawyer and we are pushing back. I hope it works out for you, I said sincerely. Even if it does not, at least I fought. That matters. She was right. Sometimes fighting matters regardless of the outcome because the alternative is accepting injustice. The years continued to pass. The neighborhood remained peaceful under reasonable HOA governance. My business thrived. I took on apprentices and taught them the craft I loved. Life was good. I never heard from or about Patricia Henderson again. She had been a storm that blew through, caused chaos, and then disappeared. The damage she tried to cause had been reversed, and the neighborhood was stronger for having gone through it. On the 5th anniversary of receiving that first threatening letter, I was in the workshop working on a commission for a client in California. It was a complex project, a wall unit made from reclaimed barn wood with custom metalwork. As I worked, I thought about how that letter had changed the trajectory of my life in ways I never could have predicted. It had forced me to stand up for myself in a way I had never done before. It had brought my neighborhood together. It had grown my business beyond what I had imagined. It had taught me about property rights and the legal system. It had made me a more engaged citizen and neighbor. Most importantly, It had reinforced a lesson I had learned over years of woodworking. Quality and integrity matter. Whether you are building furniture or building a life, cutting corners and compromising your principles leads to inferior results. The workshop door opened and Marcus came in carrying coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing me a cup. "Thanks. How is the finish drying on the Henderson project?" I asked, then caught myself and laughed. "Not that Henderson, different client." Marcus grinned. He knew the story. Everyone who worked with me did. It had become part of the workshop lore. "Looks good. Should be ready for final assembly tomorrow." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that comes from experience working together. The shop smelled like coffee and sawdust, my two favorite scents. Outside, the Arizona sun was bright and hot, but the workshop was climate-controlled and comfortable. My phone buzzed with a message from David. He was checking in, seeing if I wanted to grab lunch next week. I replied yes, suggesting our usual place. The current project was challenging, requiring precision and patience. Exactly the kind of work I loved. As my hands moved over the wood, planing and shaping and creating, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from making something beautiful and useful. The HOA lawsuit was history now, a story I told occasionally but no longer thought about daily. It had served its purpose, protecting my right to do this work in this place. Everything that came after, the business growth and the positive changes in the neighborhood, those were bonuses. As the day wound down, I cleaned up the workshop, putting tools away and sweeping up sawdust. Marcus had left earlier, and I was alone with my thoughts. The building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. I stepped outside and locked the door, looking at the workshop that had been at the center of so much conflict. It was just a building, really. Wood frame, metal roof, concrete floor. But it represented something more, the right to work and create and build a life on my own terms. The sun was setting as I walked back to my house, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Another day done. Another small victory in the ongoing project of living a good life. I had defended my workshop, and won, but more than that, I had defended a principle. And that, I thought, was worth all the stress and expense and aggravation. Inside my house, I made dinner and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow I would be back in the workshop, creating something new. That was my life. Simple and good and entirely on my own terms. Patricia Henderson had tried to take that away, and she had failed. The legal system had protected my rights, my neighbors had supported positive change, and I had come out stronger. As I fell asleep that night, my last thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for good lawyers and fair judges, for supportive neighbors and loyal apprentices, for the craft I loved and the life I had built. The HOA lawsuit had been a crucible, testing and ultimately strengthening everything that mattered, and I had passed the test.